Welcome to another edition of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, and your boy on Twitter at MMALOTN. And this week we're going over UFC 266, headlined by two title fights, and the big return of Nick Diaz going up against Robbie Lawler in a 5-round middleweight fight. Really looking forward to that. But obviously, we have the flyweight women's title on the line with Valentina Shevchenko going up against Lauren Murphy, and then the featherweight title with Alexander Volkanovski going up against Brian Ortega. Very fun card from top to bottom to top, whatever you want to call it. I think there's a ton of fun fights on this card. Another one that kind of sticks out to me off the top of my head is Nasrat Haqparast against Dan Hooker, Uroš Medic against Jalen Turner. Ton of fun fights, and hopefully we're able to find some betting edges for you guys this weekend to put a little extra cash in your pocket. Elephant in the room, I am not at UFC 266. I was supposed to be in Vegas this morning, but I did actually end up finding somebody that to buy my 266 ticket so I can put those funds towards going to another Apex experience. I did buy my 266 ticket before I went to the Apex last time, and once I went to the Apex and got back home, I'm like, fuck, I need to go to one of these, and I would rather do an Apex experience over, a mediocre fight night card than one of these UFC 266 cards in a packed arena. That experience is like none other, and I've been to over 20 UFC events in an arena. I've gotten my fill there. Now let me go back into the Apex, because who knows what it's going to look like next year when when the world starts opening up a little bit more and they possibly start taking these fight nights back on the road and not at the headquarters at the Apex. So that's why I'm not in Vegas. Luckily, shout out to my guy that was able to buy that ticket off of me and make sure that I don't take a full loss on this trip that I was supposed to go out to. But still, happy to watch the fights at home here and then possibly go back to Vegas by December to take in another Apex event. So let's just get into the betting recap of UFC Vegas 37 last week, where the lock of the night play shits the bed. And it was so frustrating because there was another play that I was so close to pulling the trigger on, but just for some reason decided to go with the under 2.5. And officially, I wanted to go with Rozenstruik inside the distance as my lock of the night play. Instead, officially, I went with the under 2.5 as my dog of the night play. That ends up hitting 1 unit at plus 145 to hit 1.545 units. I did hit a bunch of untracked on our Sarukian inside the distance. I thought that line was absolutely crazy considering the skill difference between the two, and not to mention the dramatic cardio advantage I expected Sarukian to have. However, that didn't even come into play as he was able to get Giagos out of there pretty early in that first round. So good luck by Sarukian. But the lock of the night play does shit the bed. Sarukian hits. That was a parlay. But the second leg of the parlay, Jackson and Bay's fight doesn't go to decision. That shits the bed. Jackson, 5 knockdowns, I believe he got in that fight. So many opportunities to get the finish. And it was like, getting 100 shots on net and not hitting one. That's what it felt like that night. But it was so frustrating. The JP Bays with that Kimura grip, not letting Jackson get anywhere, I really think nullified this fight doesn't go to decision from happening. So we do take an L on that last event, minus 2.55 units on there. And it's very frustrating as well, especially when I go 11-2-1 on predictions on the entire card, but the lock of the night play ends up losing. So that is a little bit of a bitch. But we're right back at it for UFC 266. Best bets and props article has already dropped on the Patreon. Obviously, the early breakdowns are already up there. A couple other things. Obviously, we got a great Discord community on there, positive community, always staying active. That's a great big part of the Patreon. Again, it's only $5 a month, so if you guys want to support your boy, that's the best way to do so. Secondly, do want to shout out Coolbet, coolbet.com. Use promo code MMALOTN2, and you will secure yourself at least up to $200 on your initial deposit that they will match. So make sure you guys check that out. You can parlay props. You can do whatever you want on Coolbet. They have great odds as well, and I more often than not am making my bets over there as well. So make sure you guys go check out Coolbet. Once again, that's Coolbet, coolbet.com. Use promo code MMALOTN2. That's the number 2, and they'll match your initial deposit up to $200. All right. That's pretty much a wrap on the intro here. Got a ton of fights to get through for you guys here. So let's not waste any more time. I'll see you guys on the flip side for the outro. Omar Moraes versus Jonathan Pearce. We got minus 160 on Moraes and plus 140 for JSP Jonathan Pearce. Let's start off on the Moraes side of things, who's coming off a successful rebound after his first ever loss in his pro MMA career. He took a loss to Giga Chikadze, then he steps in against Shane Young and absolutely beats him from minute 1 to minute 15, taking home a decision victory that night earlier this year, I believe it was. Actually, it was actually late last year, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just quickly confirm that. It was the Ngannou and Stipe card, which probably was this year. I think it was April of this year, right? March of this year. So yeah, sorry, he did fight this year, and now 6 months later, here he is going up against a guy in Jonathan Pearce. Now, Pearce, I believe he needs to go out there and have grappling success to have any success in this fight. I think on the feet, he's going to be beat by the much more hard-nosed striking style of Omar Moraes, and I think that we'll see Moraes go out there and pretty much march him down for the majority of this fight. We saw JSP obviously rebound off of his UFC debut gaffe, where he was a big favorite against Joe Lozon, but UFC jitters, and not to mention stepping into the backyard of Joe Lozon in Boston and going up against that type of crowd, it probably got to him, and he got quickly finished there in that first round against Joe Lozon after he hurt him early. If I'm not mistaken, that actually broke the orbital of Jonathan Pearce as well. I do like what Moraes brings to the table here. I think he's going to be the heavier striker. Like I said, I think it's going to cause Jonathan Pearce some fits. I think Pearce will struggle to close the distance and land takedowns here, especially when he's dealing with the heavy onslaught that he's going to be getting here from Omar Moraes. I like what, again, Moraes, hard-nosed striking style, likes to march his opponents down, use all 8 of his limbs to truly, really cause his opponents disruption. And even though Jonathan Pearce went out there and got a victory over Kai Kamaka last time around, we know Kamaka really starts to slow down in fights when he faces adversity, and Jonathan Pearce was able to weather that early storm and then have tremendous success in that second round, eventually finishing him late in that second round. But I'd be surprised if he slows down Moraes. I'd be surprised if he breaks Moraes, and I think that Moraes is actually going to be the one that ends up breaking Jonathan Pearce in this situation. So at a ripe age of 35 years old, I think Moraes still has a lot to show in this 145-pound division, and I think a guy like Jonathan Pearce is a guy that he should be able to go out there and beat. Now, I'll quickly, call out the elephant in the room. Obviously, Jonathan Pearce, a fight-ready guy, a team that I've kind of had a bit of a link with over the last couple of weeks with Eddie Cha and Santino DeFranco coming on the show to help me break down some fights. But you got to take those biases out of it, man. You can't be betting with your heart or just because you're boys with some people that are connected with some of these fighters. You got to take that out of it. You got to look at this fight or at these fights unbiased. And from an unbiased eye, I feel like Moraes is the rightful favorite in this fight, and he should be able to go out there, implement that striking style that he has done so successfully in his 11 victories as a pro, and I think he'll be able to notch his 12th victory this weekend against Jonathan Pearce. So I'm going to be going with Omar Moraes, and I'm going to take him to win this fight via decision. Matthew Semelsberger versus Martin Sano. We got minus 470 actually on Semelsberger and plus 375 on Sano. Now, a lot of people are probably scratching their heads. Who the fuck is Martin Sano? Why is he, getting in a shot in the UFC with a 4-2-1 record and his last fight being over 3.5 years ago? Simply put, he's Nick Diaz's boy. I mean, if you guys remember Chris Avila getting a shot in the UFC with a mediocre record, that was due to Nate Diaz fighting Conor McGregor at UFC 202, Artem Lobov, Conor McGregor, same thing there. And not to mention Mariano Moraes, I think that's the guy's name, who was able to get his UFC shot because Anderson Silva was taking on Israel Adesanya, I believe UFC 243, I could be off on that, or 234, one of those fights. Either way, this is another one of those situations where Nick Diaz, because of the pull that he has, was able to get his boy on the card. And, the odds reflect, what kind of skill that he brings to the table. The guy's a bit of a brawler, has a little bit of a BJJ background, obviously, but obviously has a ton of power in his hands, but more than likely he's a KO or bust kind of guy. He should be able to go out there and have, maybe some early success, but if he's not able to get the early knockout here against Semelsberger, I think he's truly going to be in some trouble. I think Semelsberger wins this fight pretty much any way that he wants, unless he gets knocked out here by Sano early in this fight. I think Semelsberger is obviously the much better fighter, and Semelsberger actually he had his pro debut 2 months after Sano had his last MMA fight, and since then he's been able to put together an 8-3 record and has shown solid skills in his come up into the UFC. Obviously, with that great victory over Carlton Minus in his debut, then he knocked out Jason Witt pretty quickly, and then fell short to Chaos Williams. But that Chaos Williams is very important here, considering the amount of damage and power that Semelsberger was able to withstand in that fight from Chaos, and we know how much power Chaos holds in his hands. If Semelsberger can take that type of damage from Chaos, I think he should be fine here against a guy like Martin Sano. So there's a reason Semelsberger is minus 470. Yes, he's parlayable. Yes, he should win this fight pretty much any which way he wants. Martin Sano is not good. I can't wait to continue fade him probably one more time after this fight. He probably will get one more shot in the UFC after this fight, considering they usually give these guys at least 2 fights in the UFC, and if they lose both of them, more than likely they're out on their butts. So I like Semelsberger here, again, pretty much any way he wants. I do actually lean ever so slightly with him possibly getting the finish in this fight. Sano is kind of durable, but I do think that Semelsberger has a ton of power to put him out here. So I'm actually going to be going with Semelsberger by KO, which is sitting around minus 135. I think there's some decent value there, especially considering the money line that you're getting on Semelsberger here. But Sano is so hittable. Semelsberger has a ton of power in his hands, and he has good enough jiu-jitsu that he could possibly club and sub Sano in this situation. But I am going to be a little bit greedy and take that KO prop at minus 135. So I like Semelsberger, and I'll take him by second round knockout. Nick Maximov taking on short notice Cody Brundage, who's stepping in for Carl Roberson. In terms of odds, we're looking at minus 155 for Nick Maximov and plus 125 for Cody Brundage. Now, Nick Maximov actually opened up as a minus 350 favorite on Bet Online and got quickly bet down. And now it seems like the market is roughly getting around that minus 150 to minus 170-ish range for Nick Maximov, which I think is accurate here. Both guys, grapplers. Maximov obviously a little bit more well-rounded in the BJJ realm, and Cody Brundage a little bit more well-rounded in the wrestling realm. So I'm very excited to see how this fight actually plays out. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a striking battle to begin with. But very difficult fight to break down. Obviously, Brundage coming on super short notice, so you got to wonder how cardio ready he's going to be to go up against a guy like Nick Maximov. Maximov obviously coming off a Contender Series victory where he was able to earn his contract. Again, difficult fight for me to break down. I think we'll see Brundage try to implement his grapple-heavy approach with his wrestling, but I do think that he'll ultimately succumb to the BJJ credentials that Maximov is going to bring to the table here, and I wouldn't be surprised if Brundage actually kind of gasses himself out trying to implement that grapple-heavy approach, and then we see Maximov, hit reversals or even hit a submission off of his back while Brundage is starting to gas out. Not too many props available on this fight yet, just because of the short notice nature of it. We only have actually 3 props here. The over under 1.5, over under 2.5, the under 2.5 sitting around plus 138, and then the fight doesn't go to decision sitting around minus 170, which is very weird to me. Well, plus 110 on one spot that actually has the under 2.5 at plus 140. I wouldn't mind taking a little bit of a stab at the violence here, because I do think that Maximov could wrap up the neck here of Brundage at some point. I like what Maximov brings to the table. I wish we just see a little bit more of him against legitimate competition, because he's just been going out there and absolutely squashing his competition on the regional scene. And I think that this will probably be his toughest test to date. I do think we'll see him struggle early here, but after that, I think we'll see Brundage start to slow down, and then I think we'll see Maximov start to go off and really start to get his grappling going and ultimately find a submission in that second or third round. So I'll probably be looking at a round 3 prop for Maximov, as I think that will be his best path to victory, is to wait until Brundage starts to, kind of tire a little bit, and then he's able to get something going later. Again, full camp Nick Maximov versus short notice Cody Brundage here. You gotta go with Maximov, but I gotta, hats off to the people that were able to get Brundage at that very heavy price tag that he was at earlier. Above plus 200, above plus 180. I think you're getting very good value on him. But I think once the line starts to settle out here around minus 150, you got to start to side with the Nick Maximov side of things. So my official prediction is actually going to be Nick Maximov by submission. I'll be looking at what these props look like once they start to drop. But for the sake of the podcast, my prediction is going to be Maximov via third round submission. Uros Medic versus Jalen Turner. We got minus 125 on Medic and plus 105 on Jalen Turner, and violence is all I can say about this fight. Uros Medic, obviously very highly touted coming off the Contender Series. I did fade him last time around with Alan Cruz and looked like a complete dumbass doing so, but I'm going to fade him once again here with Jalen Turner, especially at plus money. Got to take the shot, although I will say my favorite line on this fight is the fight doesn't go to decision. Now, Uros Medic has gone into the second round only one time in his career where he was able to finish his opponent, but his grappling looks very, very suspect when he is pushed later in fights, and I have a little bit of a question mark regarding his cardio. I do think that Jalen Turner will have the advantage if this fight hits the mat, and I think that's where Jalen is going to look to take this fight, as Uros does definitely have a very good striking game, and it's only getting better ever since he's moved down to King's MMA in California. I like what Jalen brings to the table in terms of his striking it, so I think he'll be serviceable enough in terms of hanging with Uros, and then once this fight gets to get a little bit deeper into the fight, into the second round or so, I think we'll see Jalen successful at getting this fight to the ground and then locking up a submission. I actually think that the submission prop is very, very live here for Jalen Turner, which currently sits at, I think it's a pretty damn good line as well from memory. Jalen Turner by submission plus 815. Got to take a little bit of a shot on that, man. I think that he has the advantage if this fight hits the ground. Long, gangly arms, very good for chokes, obviously. And obviously, I think that he's going to have the advantage the longer that this fight goes. And I think that Medic will start to slow down, especially if he puts on as much of a pace as he usually does early in his fight. So it'll be interesting to see if he goes out there and tries to pace himself, but I don't think that Jalen Turner will allow him to do so, and I think we'll see that Medic come out in him, and he'll be able to go out there and land some good strikes in that first round. He is absolutely live to go out there and put out Jalen Turner in that first round, but I do think that it's actually going to be Turner that survives that early onslaught and then puts it on him in that second round with his grappling, ultimately locking up a submission in this fight. But the fight doesn't go to decision. Being around roughly minus 160 is mind-boggling to me. And the widely available total is actually set at minus or at 1.5, and you can get the under 1.5 at plus 145. But I want those extra 7.5 minutes in case this fight does go into the third round, and you're getting roughly between minus 160 and minus 200 depending on the bookie that you're looking at. I think there's tremendous value on there considering the amount of finishes on both guys' records and the ability to finish from both guys as well. So I like Turner in this spot. Again, I think his striking is improving, but I do think that you got to give the slight advantage to Medic in that spot, and don't let that 10-5 record of Turner turn you off of him, no pun intended. The guy is much better than his record indicates, and he's only getting better on a fight-to-fight basis. So I think we'll see a better version of Jalen Turner here, and I think he'll survive that early onslaught and then get his grappling going in that second round, eventually finding that finish quickly thereafter. I will say, Medic, obviously working at King's MMA, meaning he's working with Benio Dariush with his grappling, but it's going to take a long time for a guy like Medic to get his grappling up to the level of UFC competition, and only being a fight or two into his UFC career, I think he's going to struggle there, especially when you got a guy like Jalen Turner who's going to be able to put it on him in those situations. So I like Jalen here. If it wasn't, again, I don't normally like taking two sides on one fight, like in terms of taking a total and then a fighter as well. But if I were to do so, I'm very much intrigued by the plus money on Turner, but I most likely will be going when the fight doesn't go to decision. It's just too nice of a number for me to pass up for two violent fighters here. So I'm going to go with Turner by second round submission, sprinkle that submission prop plus 800, and then ram and hammer that fight doesn't go to decision between minus 160 and minus 200. Don't be surprised if you see it as a lock of the night play either. So official prediction for this fight, second round submission for Jalen Turner. Roxanne Modafferi versus Tyler Santos. We got minus 420 on Santos and plus 335 on Roxanne Modafferi. Now, Roxanne obviously going out there and ripping up a lot of people's parlay tickets whenever they go out there and try to, fade her in a parlay. More often than not, she's always the big underdog going into her fights. But I think that this is one of those weekends where she's actually going to end up taking an L. Taila Santos obviously stumbled out of the gate in her UFC debut when she was getting grapple fucked by Mara Romero Barella, but then in her next two fights, she goes out there and absolutely dominates her opponents, reminding people that, yeah, she is much better than that, and it was more than likely just UFC jitters and a very off night for her that night when she took on Barella in her UFC debut. Now, she's truly going to get tested in her grappling here against Roxanne Modafferi. As we know, that's definitely the best way that Modafferi is able to win her fights is when she's able to drag her opponents to the ground, control them from the top position, or, just look to do some damage or find a submission from that top position. But I think she's going to struggle to do that here against Taila Santos. I actually think it's going to look similar to the Viviane Araujo fight. Araujo and Santos, similar fighters, good strikers, decent ground game as well, but they're very good in terms of, being able to move, get out of the way of the opponent's offense, whether it's takedowns or strikes, and then get their own game going off of that. We know that rudimentary, robotic striking style of Roxanne Modafferi is never going to change, and I think we'll see Taila Santos absolutely pick her apart from distance whenever this fight is vertical. I do think that we'll see Taila Santos' takedown defense tested in this fight, but I think that she'll be able to pass it, whether it's, even if she does get taken down, I do think that we'll see her get back up in a timely fashion to truly get her striking going after that and give, Roxanne Modafferi a lot to think about whenever she wants to close distance again. I love Taila Santos in this spot. A lot of people kind of scoff at taking women's MMA at chalk prices, but I think that this is a decent spot where we should be able to go out there and get a dub, as I do think that Taila Santos is just so much better than what Roxanne brings to the table here. Again, shout out to Roxanne, a pioneer of women's MMA, but I just think at a certain point she's going to continue to falter under the much better competition that she's going to be going up against. And even though she was able to get a win over Andrea Lee late last year, I think kind of that's where the buck stops. I think that she's going to run into a lot of trouble here against a girl like Taila Santos. So I will give it to Roxanne, though. She's very durable. She can take a punch. She can take a beating, which is why I ultimately think that Taila Santos via decision is probably going to be the best way to go. It is listed roughly around minus 130, so I think that's a pretty good shot if you want to take a single shot on this fight. But I do think that Taila Santos has this fight wrapped up with the bow. She's a much better striker. Her takedown defense is improving. Her get-up ability is improving. She's a better fighter all around. And, she's on an incline, or sorry, she's on an ascent compared to the descent that Roxanne Modafferi's career is currently on. So I am going to go with Taila Santos, and I'll pick her to win this fight via decision. Hit that minus 130. I like it, but I do think she wins this fight via decision. Chris Daukaus versus Shamil Abdurakhimov. We got minus 200 on the rising prospect Chris Daukaus and plus 170 on the Shamil Abdurakhimov. The returning Shamil Abdurakhimov, I should say, as the last time we saw him inside the cage was September of 2019, where Curtis Blaydes pounded his brains through the canvas in Abu Dhabi. I believe it was the same card as Khabib Nurmagomedov and Dustin Poirier. Since then, we've seen him scheduled for 5 fights, and it's all fallen through, I believe, due to injuries for, a couple of his opponents pulled out. He pulled out due to injuries. Sakai was rebooked. Bout with Daukaus rescheduled a couple times, especially with Abdurakhimov testing positive the last time they were scheduled back in July. But here they are this week, and hopefully, knock on wood, they're able to get back into the cage and get Shamil active once again. I will also say, Shamil Abdurakhimov hit that 40-year-old mark, and I know a lot of people kind of use that narrative in terms of when capping fights. So it's definitely a negative that Shamil Abdurakhimov is 40 years old, albeit, a 40-year-old at heavyweight is usually not the worst thing in the world, but when you're dealing with a banshee like Chris Daukaus, I think it's going to be very difficult for Shamil Abdurakhimov to deal with that. Now, Shamil will obviously have the grappling advantage in this fight, and he's going to want to look to get this fight to the ground to get away from that striking style of Chris Daukaus, which seems to get better on a fight-to-fight basis. Not only is his striking getting better on a fight-to-fight basis, but his physique continues to improve, where we see him look better and better, lighter and lighter every single fight, and I think that definitely helps in terms of his speed advantage over his opponents, his movement in terms of being able to stay away from the big shots and the takedown attempts of his opponents, and then landing those pinpoint accurate shots on his opponents, eventually putting them down and putting them out. I'm liking the slow rise of Chris Daukaus as well, right? That's another thing that a lot of people are looking at, saying, why is he fighting a guy like Shamil? I like it. Go from Olenek to Abdurakhimov, and then let's take another smaller step on top of that after Abdurakhimov. But what's the reason of rushing this guy, right? Like, he clearly is showing that he is still a prospect. He's still trying to work on his game, and I feel like this fight over getting a fight or a win over a guy like Shamil, hopefully having to deal with adversity, will only make him a better fighter in the future. I'm kind of hoping that we actually see Shamil have some grappling success here, and we see Daukaus actually survive that, get back to his feet, and then get his striking going after that. But I truly think that no matter how many times Shamil tries to close the distance, Daukaus is just going to be throwing crisp, straight shots down the middle, keeping Shamil Abdurakhimov shy and timid in terms of closing the distance, and then I think eventually we'll see Daukaus find that knockout blow. I do like Daukaus in this position quite a lot. It's just the unknowns and the uncertainties of his ground game, which gives me a little bit of pause in terms of, unloading the cannon on him in this situation. But he should be able to go out there and give Shamil a ton of trouble. Again, if the striking wasn't as good of Daukaus in this fight, I'd probably look to back Shamil as an underdog in this spot. As you guys know, that I love backing, guys that have a decent enough grappling advantage over their opponents. But considering how good Daukaus has been looking over his last several fights, it's going to be very difficult to fade him in this spot. So I am going to be taking Daukaus, and I do think that we see him actually go out there and get the knockout too. So official prediction for this fight will be Daukaus, and I'm going to take him to win by first round knockout. Nasrat Haqparast versus Daniel Hooker. We got -145 for Hooker and +125 for Nasrat Haqparast. Now, this fight has been an absolute shit show all week, considering that both guys have had issues in terms of getting their visas set. But as of this recording, both of them have their visas set, but they are not too far off from when they actually have to weigh in. So I'm very interested to see what they have to do on their flights. Obviously, Nasrat coming from Germany and Dan Hooker coming over from New Zealand. But it's very interesting to see what these guys are going to look like on the scales. Now, I believe Daniel Hooker will have no issues making weight. That guy is a consummate professional, and if my memory serves me right, he's never really actually had any issues in terms of cutting weight. Nasrat Haqparast on the other side, we obviously saw he had that gaff way back in January, and that is obviously a bit of a concern. So if you're looking to back Nasrat, I would rather wait for the weigh-ins, see what he looks like there, see if he actually makes the weight, and then make a decision based off of that. But if we take all of that out of it and we just look at this fight, considering that or thinking that both these guys are going to come in top shape. Sorry, last thing I got to say about Nasrat before I move on with it, he did also lose his mother about 2 weeks ago, so that's probably playing into his fight emotionally as well. But he's still going to be fighting, and that's a good thing to make out of this as well. But getting back to this fight stylistically, Dan Hooker obviously is going to be a much more skilled fighter, a much more talented striker in this fight, right? He should be able to stay on the outside, let his strikes go, and truly cause issues for Nasrat in terms of the variety of strikes that's going to be coming his way. But Nasrat is pretty good in terms of closing distance, blitzing, being explosive, and using his speed to his advantage to land that power on the chin of his opponents and putting them out. In my opinion, Daniel Hooker is kind of damaged goods, right? He's taken so much damage over his last several fights. Obviously, last time he got knocked out by Michael Chandler. The Dustin Poirier fight took tremendous damage in that, but still was able to see the bell. After that, the Paul Felder fight took massive damage in that. The Al Iaquinta fight is really the last fight where he was, in control pretty much the entire time. Never really took a considerable amount of damage. But the last 3 fights alone for Daniel Hooker have been absolutely crazy in terms of the amount of damage he's been absorbing and whether it's going to have an effect on him moving forward in his career. Now he's going up against a heavy puncher, Nasrat Haqparast, who will definitely be able to find that chin. It gives me pause. Again, this is going to look like one of those fights where Daniel Hooker probably is going to be in the driver's seat, but one of those big bombs from Nasrat Haqparast will eventually land and could potentially put Daniel Hooker down and put him out. So I do lean Nasrat Haqparast as the side here, especially around +125. But even if you want to get a little bit greedier, taking Nasrat by KO, as I believe that Hooker will more than likely be the better minute winner. But Nasrat should do, and I think that the win condition for Haqparast is probably KO around +250, it's +310, +320 on certain spots. That's probably the best way to hit Haqparast here. With that said, though, I think the best bet for this fight is actually the under 2.5. I think we're going to see a tremendous amount of violence in this fight. Plus 110 is what the under is currently sitting at. And I think that both guys are going to go to war here. I'd be surprised if, if we don't even get one knockdown in this fight. But I do think that one of these guys is going to land. We've seen Haqparast finish in the past, obviously, by Drew Dober. And I think that Daniel Hooker could definitely put some finishing touches here on Nasrat as well. But I do ultimately think it's going to be Nasrat that finds that chin of Daniel Hooker and puts him down. Again, the only thing causing me concern is all of the out of cage issues with both guys here and how it could affect these guys here. But if anything, it could help the violence bet here, as both these guys are going to go out there and try to swing leather and try to get that finish, because who knows what they're going to be looking like physically speaking and how their cardio could possibly be affected by all this craziness that's going outside of the octagon. So I am going with the under 2.5. I like the plus 110 there, but in terms of an actual pick here, I'm going to go with Nasrat. I'm going to pick him by first round knockout. Merab Dvalishvili versus Marlon Moraes. We got minus 250 on Merab and plus 200-ish on Marlon Moraes, and how far Marlon has fallen since coming into the UFC. And, especially since his title fight against Henry Cejudo, he did manage to get that split decision over Aldo, albeit a lot of people expected Aldo to actually get his hand raised that night. I personally think that Moraes did a good enough job in that third round to get that victory. So that's my stance on it. But since then, he's been finished by Corey Sandhagen and then obviously by Rob Font back in December of last year. I will say, though, I do think that he stepped into the cage way too quickly after the Corey Sandhagen knockout, and I think that showed in that Rob Font fight. Now, he took off about 9 months, and I think that's a good amount of time for him to actually get his wits back about him, but I think that this is a very tough stylistic matchup for him to overcome. I will say, he is very live in that first round, and I think I saw around plus 800 for him to win inside round 1, and I think that's a very good shot here, especially against a guy in Merab Dvalishvili, who, in my opinion, gets hit a little bit too much and relies on that durability to be able to push through and implement the game that he normally implements. But Marlon Moraes, former WSOF champion, former UFC title challenger, very highly touted guy coming into the UFC, has never really panned out to be the guy that a lot of people expected him to be. And now I think that he's going to go on a 3-fight skid, and we might not even see him inside the UFC past this weekend, to be honest. I wouldn't be surprised if the UFC lets him go to Bellator or go to PFL, whatever it may be, especially if he can't get past a guy like Merab. And that's not shitting on Merab at all. That's just more so saying that Moraes doesn't have what it takes to cut it in the UFC anymore. I'm sure they're paying him a pretty penny as well, considering the name value that he brought when he came into the UFC, especially as the WSOF champion. But why should we pay this guy if he's not able to beat, a guy like Merab, who's a little bit down further in the ranks? So yeah, I truly think that Moraes' best path to victory in this fight is getting a first round knockout, because after that, I think that pace and pressure on Merab is truly going to get to Moraes, and I think that will cause him to slow down in the second and third rounds, allowing Merab to take over after that. My concern is whether Merab will get the finish here or not. If you have the opportunity to take a shot on Merab on those double chance props, right? The KO or decision for Merab, I think that's the best way to go and the best way to get value on Merab in this fight. But even parlaying him is something I think you could be pretty safe, and then just hedging off with Moraes round 1, I believe again around plus 800, plus 700, or even KO, which I think is around plus 600 if I'm not mistaken. So you're getting good value on these hedge opportunities from Moraes if that's what you're liking. But I'm fully on the Merab side here. I think he's going to go out there and absolutely do work against Moraes. Obviously, he's on a very long winning streak at this point in time. And then obviously most recently coming off that victory over Cody Stamann last time around, where he was able to implement his game against a very high-level wrestler in Cody Stamann and a very solid striker in Cody Stamann. Just lets you know what kind of talent we're dealing with a guy like Merab. And him finally getting a fight against a high-level name like Marlon Moraes is just, it's about fucking time. Let's put it that way. It's about time we get Merab into that top 7, top 5 of this 135-pound division, because his style is very difficult for a lot of people to keep up with, not to mention his work ethic is just otherworldly as well. Again, not much more I can really do in terms of breaking this fight down for you guys. It's Moraes round 1 or Merab takes over, either finishes him late or goes on to a decision. So in terms of actual prediction, I'm going to go with Merab via decision. But if you do have access to that double chance prop, like I said earlier, KO/decision for Merab, I would take a shot on that to get the best value you're going to get here. So I'm going to go Merab Dvalishvili via decision. Jessica Andrade against Cynthia Calvillo. We got -240 on Jessica Andrade and +200 on Cynthia Calvillo. Now, Jessica Andrade obviously coming off that title fight loss where Shevchenko was able to get her into that crucifix position and quickly finish her thereafter. And Cynthia Calvillo coming off a decision loss to Shevchenko late last year where she was a -225 favorite. A line that I just did not understand and took the shot on Catlin that night and luckily was able to cash that bet. Cynthia Calvillo, when she is successful, she's able to get takedowns and she's able to control her opponents from the top position, and she has a lot of success when she is in that top position. We saw the Courtney Casey fight where she did have success in terms of winning that fight in the striking realm, but if she thinks she's going to have similar success rate against Jessica Andrade, I think she's going to be sorely mistaken. I think that Andrade will do Andrade shit in this fight. She's going to move forward. She's going to land big bombs. She should be able to stuff takedowns. And I don't think even if Calvillo gets her on output, I don't think that she'd be able to outpoint the amount of damage that Jessica Andrade is going to be able to land on her. Now, Andrade will be at a 2 or 3 inch height disadvantage in this fight. And usually that benefits anybody that's going to be looking to use their takedown defense to their advantage. And I do think that's going to happen here where we'll see Calvillo try to land takedowns here against Andrade, although I don't think that the takedowns and the wrestling of Calvillo is truly up to the point to get a girl like Andrade down time and time again. Now, if you want to mix up with her in the clinch, we obviously saw what she was able to do to Katlyn Chookagian, land some big shots there and hurt her, obviously put her down with the body shot and finish her near the ending of that first round. Whereas Calvillo, if she wants to do that and she's trying to get takedowns off those clinch positions, I think it's going to be a lot more difficult for her to do than people are expecting. I do like Calvillo. She is a good fighter. I did cash her when she fought Jessica Eye. I've cashed her in the past as well. I'm trying to recall which fights, but she's a solid fighter. I like what she brings to the table. But I just think that Andrade is a little bit too much for her at this point, right? Andrade will always be successful in terms of landing big shots. I've seen a lot of people saying that she could potentially take Calvillo out. I will give Calvillo the benefit of the doubt. She's a very durable opponent, but if they do mix up in the clinch, I do have concerns in terms of her being able to survive the power that's going to be coming her way. I do like Andrade here, though. I think she marches down Calvillo for the majority of the 15 minutes, landing the bigger, better shots, and just optically doing what the judges need to see to win a fight. I like Jessica Andrade here. She's going to beat girls like Calvillo, but she'll never be at the top of this division, especially when Valentina Shevchenko is going to be holding the throne. So it's up to Andrade to go out there and weed out the weak links in terms of who doesn't deserve a shot at Shevchenko here. And I think that this is a prime opportunity for her to go out there and get that done. So I'll be surprised if Calvillo has much grappling success, especially if she's even able to hold her down if she does land a takedown in this spot. But I do think that this fight will take place in the striking realm, and that's where you have to give the advantage to Andrade just on power and ability to march down her opponents. Again, Calvillo might put up a fight in terms of the output that she puts and the activity, but I don't think that it's going to be enough to overcome the amount of damage that she's going to be taking in this fight against Jessica Andrade. So I'm going to go with Andrade via decision in this spot. Although if they do mix up more so in the clinch than I think they are, I do think that Calvillo is going to be at risk at getting finished. But my ultimate prediction is going to be Jessica Andrade via decision. Curtis Blaydes versus Jairzinho Rozenstruik. We got -310 on Curtis Blaydes and +255 is the return on Rozenstruik. Probably one of the more binary fights that we can break down on this entire card. Curtis Blaydes will more than likely need that takedown to find success in this fight. Jairzinho Rozenstruik will more than likely need that takedown defense to hold up for him to have success, although he could possibly catch Curtis Blaydes on the way in, as Derek Lewis caught Curtis Blaydes on the way in last time around and knocked his ass out. Now, I don't know if I've, like my man Z would say, PTBD, post-traumatic bet disorder on Curtis Blaydes, because whenever I back him, it seems like he goes out there and gets knocked out. I backed him against Francis the second time. I backed him against Derek Lewis pretty heavily last time. Albeit inside the distance just to get a better line. But this seems like another prime spot. He should be able to go out there and take down a guy like Jairzinho Rozenstruik and do heavy work from on top and potentially find a finish in this spot. Blaydes obviously has a very good wrestling pedigree. That's where he gets his best work done, is when he's able to drag fights to the ground. Rozenstruik, obviously a very good kickboxer, has some tremendous power in his hands and can definitely shut the lights off on his opponents. I have this imaginary heavyweight knockout artist gauntlet that I have in my head, where like fighters need to, if they're able to go past a certain guy, maybe they're ready for the next guy. Unfortunately for Curtis Blaydes, he's doing the gauntlet in reverse, right? I have Francis Ngannou at the top, couldn't pass that test. Derek Lewis under him, couldn't pass that test. Under him, I have Jairzinho Rozenstruik, and I feel like Curtis Blaydes should be able to go out there and beat a guy like Jairzinho. Below Jairzinho is Walt Harris, but we haven't seen Blaydes go up against Harris. I do think that he would go out there and absolutely shellac him in this spot. Now, we saw Blaydes in his last fight against Derek Lewis have a pretty good first round, strictly just striking, right? He went out there and just knew he couldn't rush the takedown, knew Derek Lewis was waiting for that shot just so he can uncork an uppercut. It didn't come in that first round, and we saw, Blaydes, it seemed like he was just not trying to rush that takedown. In the second round, though, it seemed like he pressured himself to eventually get a takedown, and that ultimately was his demise. I feel like he pressured his own self to go out there and land a takedown so that he can find success. Whereas if he probably just stayed on the feet, continued to do what he did, and maybe even just wait for a Derek Lewis blitz attack, maybe those countering one of those attacks with a takedown probably would have been his best bet in terms of getting that fight to the ground. But the fight did get to the ground, but unfortunately it was him staring up at the lights instead of actually landing a takedown of his own. Here, though, I feel as though he'll have a little more success in terms of dragging this fight to the ground. Jairzinho, I don't think he has that Derek Lewis type of knockout power, which is just otherworldly, but he does have some good power when he's able to kind of push forward and land the strikes on his own. I think Curtis Blaydes definitely learned a lot from that the Lewis fight, especially in terms of when you are shooting your takedown, don't go into the power hand of your opponent, go into the secondary hand. So maybe we'll see that with his fight with Jairzinho this weekend. But I do think that once this fight hits the ground, it's a massive mismatch. You can say all you want about Rozenstruik making improvements, but I don't think that he's ready for a guy that has a grappling pedigree and top control of Curtis Blaydes here. Now, I used to tease the Curtis Blaydes via submission prop a lot in a lot of his past fights, but more often than not, it seems like he goes out there and just looks for the ground and pound over a submission. I will say, though, I feel like a submission will be a little bit easier to get here on Jairzinho Rozenstruik, and at roughly a plus 1,000, I feel like it's worth a little bit of a sprinkle, especially considering that Blaydes is at minus 310. I do think that Blaydes will get the finish in this fight. Taking him inside the distance around plus 120 is not too bad of a line, but I do think that this is a great fight for him to go out there and get back on track. I'm not sold on Rozenstruik, nor do I think that he is going to be able to, properly telegraph that takedown and try to counter it effectively. So I do like Blaydes here. I'm going to take him to win this fight via second round TKO, maybe submission, but it's going to come on the ground. You bet your ass he's going to get Jairzinho to the ground, and I think he's going to finish him quickly thereafter. So I'm going Blaydes second round TKO. Here we go. Probably the most talked about fight all week. We got a 185-pound fight, 5 rounds between Nick Diaz, the return of Nick Diaz against Robbie Lawler. Talk about dream matchmaking, especially to have a guy like Nick Diaz step back into the cage. You probably couldn't have done it much better than a guy like Robbie Lawler. Now, this is a fight that's a rematch from a fight that took place about 17 years ago, which is crazy to say, which means I would have been 13 years old when that fight took place, where Nick Diaz was able to dispose of Robbie Lawler via KO in their first meeting there. And now they're running it back here in much different circumstances. because obviously they've both gone through tremendous improvements and tremendous success within their MMA careers, with Nick Diaz securing a Strikeforce title while he was away, and Robbie Lawler securing a UFC title when a lot of people were already writing him off, saying that he didn't have championship aspirations. But he proved everybody wrong, managing to nab that title from Johnny Hendricks, and was able to hold it for a couple fights before ultimately losing at UFC 201 against Tyron Woodley. Now, I'm very excited for this fight, but the whole thing this week has been Nick Diaz doesn't look that great, right? There was that clip going around of him shadowboxing, and people say he doesn't look in shape, and obviously you can tell he wanted to fight at 185 pounds because there's no way at that frame that he was going to make 170 pounds. Luckily, Robbie Lawler just is a gamer, didn't really give a fuck, and was down to do it at 185 regardless. Good enough for him in terms of not having to go out there and cut the extra weight, so he can just go out there and make that 185 pound limit. Very difficult to break this fight down, right? It's very, very difficult because Nick Diaz obviously been out of the cage for 6 years. Robbie Lawler hasn't really been looking like himself over his last several fights, as he's gone 0-4 in his last 4 fights, but he has been going up against guys that are just stylistic nightmares for him, right? Neil Magny put him through the meat grinder, and that was a weird fight for Robbie Lawler in terms of the fact that he actually stepped in on short notice. Not something you see often from the legend Robbie Lawler, but he did, and he paid for it. He was a plus 195 dog going into that fight, and exactly what a lot of people expected to happen happened. Like I said, Neil Magny put him through the meat grinder, grapple fucking him, wrestling him, whatever it was, just trying to stay away from that big power of Neil Magny or of Robbie Lawler, and he was able to do so. Same with the fight before that with Colby Covington, where he put on a tremendous pace against Robbie, landing takedowns, landing shots from the outside, not really letting Robbie Lawler get his game going, and he was able to be successful with that. Ben Askren, that was a fight that he probably was close to winning if the referee actually ended up stopping it. And then the Rafael Dos Anjos fight, we saw Dos Anjos put on a complete performance in MMA, something that Robbie Lawler just was not able to keep up with. With Nick Diaz, on the other hand, obviously the last time we saw him was 6 years ago, like I said, against Anderson Silva, where, we saw Silva was just obviously the better fighter, right? Silva was a minus 355 favorite going into that fight, and you could definitely see it once that fight really started to get going. It started off with a little bit of that Nick Diaz shenanigans, right? Going up against the cage and laying down, all that shit. But once the fight actually started getting going and Anderson Silva fell into his groove, there's no looking back for Anderson, and he was able to cruise through that fight, albeit he did test positive for some sort of steroids after the fact. But say what you want, everybody's on steroids, right? But then the 2 fights before that, very tough fight against Georges St. Pierre, where St. Pierre, obviously a minus 500-ish favorite in that fight, was definitely going to go out there and grapple fucking Nick Diaz en route to a decision. And then the Carlos Condit fight, very close fight from both sides, both guys throwing tremendous output, tremendous pace, and ultimately the judges ended up siding with Carlos Condit that night. Last time we saw Nick Diaz actually win a fight was 10 years ago. I believe that was October of 2011. I could be off. It might have been February as well. I don't know why my months are getting mixed up right now, but it was back in 2011 where he was able to piece up BJ Penn over 15 minutes. And that fight possibly could have been stopped in the second round as well when Nick Diaz really started to open up. Now, 10 years or 6 years later, if you guys have been following Nick Diaz on Instagram, you can see he's just been pretty much partying this entire time. But he has been, getting his marathons in, and he's been getting some rolling in. So he's definitely been training. It's not like he's just been getting fucked up for the last 6 years. That's why it's so difficult to really cap this fight, right? Robbie Lawler, 39 years old now. Obviously not the best not the best version of Robbie Lawler we've been seeing of him over the last couple fights. And Nick Diaz, if his durability can hold up, probably has the advantage in a 5-round fight. Robbie Lawler, he can throw all he wants at Nick, but if that chin, that legendary chin of Nick holds up, he should be able to walk through those shots and then start doing that Nick Diaz thing in the second, third, fourth, and fifth round of this fight, putting that pace and that pressure on Robbie Lawler. Now at plus 120, the fight was pretty much a pick 'em throw fight. We can tell that clip came out, and now a lot of money is coming in on Robbie Lawler, pushing Nick Diaz down to a plus 120 dog. I have no real interest or intrigue to bet either side here. I don't know how you can say you have value on either side in this fight. It's just very difficult in terms of what we're going to be seeing from Nick Diaz. The thing that I do like, though, is the over 2.5. A little bit chalky now around that minus 200, but I do think that the durability will hold up from either guy. Nick Diaz, obviously not a crazy one-punch knockout artist, even though he did one-punch knockout Robbie Lawler 17 years ago. But when we do see Nick Diaz finish opponents, It's through an accumulation of strikes. And I think that we're going to have to see Robbie Lawler truly have to slow down here before Nick Diaz puts his combinations together and gets Robbie Lawler out of there. So I will be leaning with the Nick Diaz side, like 51% Nick Diaz, 49% Robbie Lawler. But I think that this fight's going to go over. I think we see it going to the fourth and probably the third, fourth, and fifth rounds here with Nick Diaz potentially getting a late finish. Again, we have 12 other fights that we could be betting on. There's no reason to go out there and risk your hard-earned money on a fight where there's so many question marks about both guys in this spot. Sit back, enjoy this fight as a fan. Be thankful the UFC gave us 5 rounds of this fight so that we can enjoy it. Don't be on the edge of your seat hoping that you're, going to be losing money or making money on a fight like this. I'm going on the Nick Diaz side. I think he goes out there, weathers that early storm from Robbie Lawler, and then starts to put it on him later in this fight. But just, again, super hard to be super confident in it. The only thing that I feel somewhat confident in is the overs, though. Anything over, I'd say over 2.5. I feel okay with that. Again, if it's a little bit chalky for you, go ahead and throw in parlay if you want. But I do see this fight going closer to rounds 4 and round 5 with Nick Diaz getting a late finish. So I'm going to go Nick Diaz probably round 4 TKO. Co-main event time here. We got the women's flyweight strap on the line where we have Valentina Shevchenko going up against Lauren Murphy. And can't really, say that I need to say too much about this fight. I'm pretty sure a lot of people know how this fight is going to go, especially when you have Valentina around that minus 1,300 price tag and plus 800-ish on Lauren Murphy. Now, Valentina Shevchenko has pretty much cleared out the division, right? The top of it. Now, just quickly looking at the rankings here for the flyweights, she's beaten Jessica Andrade, number 1. She's beaten Katlyn Chookagian, number 2. She's beaten Jennifer Maia, number 4. Beaten number 8 in Jessica I. So there are 4 out of the top 15 that she's already beaten, albeit, the other fighters that I didn't mention probably won't stand much of a chance here. So next up is obviously number 3, Lauren Murphy, who did beat number 6, Joanne Calderwood last time around in a controversial decision, I must say. But she did earn herself a title shot here as she is on a 5-fight winning streak, having wins over Mara Romero Barella, Andrea Lee, Roxanne Modafferi, Lilia Shakarova, all that I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that was on short notice back at UFC 254. And then she beat Joanne Calderwood earlier this year to secure that title shot for herself. I'll say this about Murphy. She's definitely gotten better with her striking since moving down to Houston, or at least that Houston area, and start working with crew Bob Perez, I can't remember the guy's name, but he's Derek Lewis's striking coach as well. Working with him, and we've definitely seen an improvement in her striking game since that fight, which is why I believe that she's been going on this streak that she's currently on. She is a strong woman, obviously at 125 pounds, and she could potentially land a takedown here on Valentina Shevchenko, similar to what Jennifer Maia was able to do, but as we saw in the Joanne Calderwood fight, we saw Lauren Murphy have grappling success in that second round, but was not able to secure a takedown in that third round, ultimately getting pieced up. And I expect to see the same thing here against Shevchenko. Now, if you guys remember that Jennifer Maia fight with Shevchenko, Maia took, I think it was round 2 after she landed the takedown and pretty much won that round. And we saw the live line on Shevchenko go from minus 2,000 all the way down to minus 300. And if that happens here again, you best believe that I'm going to be unloading the clip at minus 300, because that would be the most value you're ever going to get on Shevchenko if she's not fighting, Amanda Nunes. But the case here, whenever you have these giant favorites, just like Arman Sarukian last week, is, not who's going to win. We obviously know who's going to win, but how they're going to win and when they're going to win. That's where we're, Charlie, trying to find our value in these fights. And I'm kind of surprised that they actually set the over-under at 2.5 here, and it's currently around even money. And I think that this fight is actually going to go over that 2.5 mark, as I do believe that Murphy is quite durable here. If Shevchenko does get her into that crucifix position early in this fight, like she did with Jessica Andrade and like she did against Katlyn Chookagian, I think we'll see some success from Murphy in terms of getting out of that and staying out of too much danger early in this fight. But the longer that it drags on, I think we'll see Shevchenko have more and more success, especially with takedowns, and then eventually setting up that crucifix position or any type of position on the ground to truly put a hurting on Lauren Murphy. So I'm a little bit of a standstill in terms of I believe this fight's going to go over 2.5, but I do think that Shevchenko will finish this fight the later that it goes, so that could possibly conflict, especially if she ends up getting that finish in that third round. I would probably poke the over 2.5. Maybe take a couple shots at that round 4 and round 5 prop as well for Shevchenko here. I just don't have the most amount of confidence in terms of playing aside there with the totals. Like I said, I'd like the over, as I do think that Murphy will be tough enough to take the damage that Shevchenko throws out there for her. But who knows? Maybe she uncorks one of those crazy head kicks like she flattened Jessica Eye with several fights ago. And Murphy might go down like a ton of bricks as well. Could happen, but I do ultimately end up on the Shevchenko side. It's going to be tough to beat her, man. She's 33 years old in her fighting prime. I think she has another 2 to 3 years solid of being at this level before another woman comes up and gets close to even contending against her. But yeah, Lauren Murphy is not going to be that one at 38 years old to go out there and beat a stud like Valentina Shevchenko. So I'm going to go with Shevchenko, and I'm going to call it 4th round TKO. Time for the main event. We got Alexander Volkanovski defending his featherweight strap against Brian Ortega. In terms of odds, we're looking at minus 170 for Alexander Volkanovski, and plus 150 is a return on Brian Ortega. Now with Alexander Volkanovski, you got him coming off of 2 wins over the consensus featherweight GOAT in Max Holloway, albeit the second fight a little bit controversial in terms of the decision, but he still managed to keep it close enough that the judges believe that he won the fight, and that's good enough for me, especially when you're going up against a guy as talented as Max Holloway. But this 19-fight winning streak that Alexander Volkanovski is currently on is unprecedented, and the level of competition that he's been going up against, especially over his last 5 fights, has been very phenomenal, and obviously there is a lot of stock that you can put in it, considering the way that he's beating these guys and the game plans and how he's executing it. The one thing that I've been pretty much saying all week about Alexander Volkanovski is that he's a master at executing game plans, and I feel like he has the perfect game plan to go out there and beat a guy like Brian Ortega. More often than not, you see misdirections, light kicks, body work, great movement, never really staying still. You know what I mean? It's very difficult for a lot of opponents to hit a guy like Volkanovski, especially when he's switching stances and moving as much as he is. The guy's a little ball of energy as well. He does a really good job in terms of feinting takedowns, or obviously just, feinting anything just to get you to react so that he can hit you with what he actually wants to hit you with, whether it's a leg kick, whether it's a body punch, whatever it may be. He's just such a master at that. You got to give some credit to Eugene Behrman and those guys over there at City Kickboxing. I know City Kickboxing is not the only gym that Volkanovski works at. There's another gym that he does. It's just slipping my mind at this moment, but they do a really good job in terms of going out there and putting together a bulletproof game plan that Volkanovski can put together and stifle his opponents. I think we're going to see the same thing this weekend against Brian Ortega. Now, Ortega took an extended layoff and then did come back against the Korean Zombie late last year. And, had a really good performance. We saw a much better Brian Ortega, much more confident Brian Ortega, especially with the striking. He was able to put together good combinations, work behind a jab, and really use his length as his advantage. And then he landed a beautiful spinning back elbow in the second round there that really shook and wobbled up a Korean Zombie. It seemed like Zombie had a little bit of issues trying to recover after that. Even going into that third round, you can see him like stretching out his jaw a couple times, and you don't often see that happen with the fighter. I truly think that that's not the Korean Zombie that we've come to know and can expect. And I think that might be skewing a lot of people's idea of what Brian Ortega truly brings to the table. Now he's going up against Volkanovski, and unless he, hurts him and has him on wobbly legs for 5 rounds, I think we'll see a much different fight this time around. Obviously, the best part of Brian Ortega's game is his jiu-jitsu because he's so crafty and difficult to deal with when you get into those ranges. But I do think that a guy like Volkanovski will have good enough submission defense to stay out of trouble, and he has good enough wherewithal in terms of staying out of those positions and protecting himself from getting submitted against a guy like Brian Ortega. I think we'll see another masterful performance from Volkanovski here, mixing it up with leg kicks, albeit we do have the southpaw threat here from Brian Ortega, so I'm interested to see how Volkanovski chooses to deal with that in terms of implementing his leg kicks, but I'm sure This guy's championship level, championship caliber. You know, he has 23 fights of experience under his belt, and not to mention a very solid coaching staff behind him that should be able to put together a very solid game plan to go deal with a guy like Brian Ortega. I'd be surprised if we see Volkanovski go out there and try to shoot takedowns to kind of mix it up, but I do think that we'll see him at least kind of feint it and try to keep Brian Ortega thinking. I think that the perception of Ortega is kind of skewed here because of his performance against Korean Zombie last time around, and you can't sell me on just one performance from Brian Ortega to make me believe that he's a fully changed man at this time around. Now, if he goes out there and beats a guy like Volkanovski and decisively beats him, not, you know, Brian Ortega him like he used to. If you guys remember earlier in Ortega's UFC career, he used to get his ass whooped for like 10 minutes before he ended up coming back and then finishing his opponents late, more so as a comeback scenario than anything. You know, if he does that here against Volkanovski, all credit to him, but I don't think we'll see as masterful or as solid of a performance as we saw from him last time around, this time around. So I do like Volkanovski here. I think we see him and still here. I think he's one of the best featherweights out there. I truly think his only real test is Max Holloway, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see another Holloway rematch if Holloway's able to go out there and get another victory under his belt. Obviously, there was that Yair Rodriguez fight that's been teased for a while that keeps to be going on and off at this point in time. But if Holloway goes out there and even gets a title shot after this fight, I wouldn't be surprised, man. That second fight was super close. That you can make a case for Max Holloway, so I wouldn't be surprised if we see a trilogy fight here, albeit, you know, Volkanovski up 2-0 already. But in terms of this weekend, I am going with Alexander Volkanovski. I feel rather confident in it as well, that he should be able to go out there and stay away from the jiu-jitsu threat of Ortega and then really expose this new striking Ortega that seemed to come about after that Korean Zombie fight. So I will also say Ortega, very durable. I'd be surprised if Volkanovski actually finishes him here. So I'll be going with Alexander Volkanovski to retain his featherweight strap via decision. And that's a wrap on the breakdowns. Hope you guys enjoyed the episode. If you haven't already, please hit that like, hit that subscribe. That's the best way to support your bit. But if you want to go that extra mile, the Patreon is the best way to do so. Make sure you guys check that out. The link is in the description below. Something that I actually forgot to include at the beginning of the show here, there are prize picks tips on there as well. I used to drop videos for them. Doesn't seem like the squeeze is worth it anymore. I'd rather just put it up on the Patreon, which I've been doing over the last several weeks. So if you guys are looking for prize picks tips, I have it up on the Patreon. And then secondly, obviously shout out to Coolbet sponsoring your boy, coolbet.com. Use promo code MMALOTN2 and they'll match your initial deposit up to $200. Good luck on your bets this weekend. I'll see you guys next week for, I believe it's Santos versus Walker, which is a tremendous light heavyweight matchup that I can't wait to break down for you guys. But there are some cool prop bets and, prop bets, but just underdog bets and bets in general that I'm really looking forward to capitalizing on for next week. So you guys are definitely going to want to tune in next week. And hopefully I'm able to start dropping some breakdowns for those on the Patreon by Sunday of this week, so you guys can get a little bit of an early start and to seeing what next weekend's card brings to the table. All right, good luck on your bets this weekend, and I'll see you guys next week.